Okay, how we get started. Okay, hello everybody. This is joint work with the title. First of all, the title of my paper is "The Gold Standard and the Rules of the Game: Lessons from the EU Wine Experience." This is joint work with Gaston Diaz from the University of de la República in Uruguay. So this is an economic history paper. It's different to what we have seen so far, and today I wanted to give you a flavor of this piece of research. It's still work in progress, so I would appreciate your comments and reaction. Let me see how this works. Okay. Yeah, so what do we do with this paper? According to the gold standard model, the trade balance and the level of prices should move in the same direction. For example, if you run a trade deficit, your imports are larger than your exports, so you have a gold outflow, and therefore the prices drop, and therefore credit drops. Similarly, if you run a trade surplus, your exports are larger than your imports, you have a gold inflow, therefore prices increase, and credit increases too. So this mechanism is automatic, and the idea was put forward initially by David Hume in his price specie flow mechanism. Okay, so there is no need, according to this hypothesis, to this framework, there is no need to intervene actively in the market. If you're on a gold standard, basically this automatic mechanism would bring you back to equilibrium. Now, there is evidence in the literature already from the late 50s that core countries with established central banks would break the rules of the game, would not really follow this mechanism. Basically, they would try to affect the discount rate, the short-term interest rate, and therefore credit, and they would do that because they wanna shield their economy from external shocks. Okay, so there was some room of maneuvering. It's not what we have in mind, gold standard, fixed exchange rate, so the central bank, there's no independent monetary policy at all. There was some room to maneuver, especially for core countries with established central banks. There is now evidence that often they would systematically break the rules of the game. More recently, there is more evidence on that using econometric methods. For example, Morris and Bazot et al. Show that basically this was the case for their data is very rich. They have a large country panel, and they confirm the initial result by Bloomfield. Okay. So you may want to ask me questions during the course of the presentation. Okay, interrupt and ask questions. Now, on the other hand, the peripheral countries were in a difficult position because most of them had less established central banks or had no central bank. Okay, and because there were price takers at international trade. So, for example, they were producers of primary products, so they were small peripherals, so they were price takers for their exports, and at the same time they would import manufacturing and capital goods from abroad, from the core countries. They weren't able to affect those prices, and therefore they had very hard time. Often they would be exposed to external shocks, and in practice oftentimes they would leave the gold standard and they would come back at some point later, or they might decide not to do so. Okay? An exception to this are the Scandinavian countries. Note here that Scandinavia at that time were considered peripheral. They were considered peripheral economies. Okay, and so an exception are those countries with, although they didn't have a central bank, they had large commercial banks that often would play the role of a central bank. Okay. Okay, so what do we do in this paper? What do we try to do? So we look at the case of Uruguay and ask the question, how did this country, a small peripheral country, stay on gold for 38 years without any interruption, almost without any interruption, and with no central bank. So it operated under a free banking system fully during this entire period. So this is an interesting case, and this is the only maybe peripheral country, only peripheral country, with exception of Scandinavia, as I said before, that managed to do that. Okay, the hypothesis we put forward is the following: in Uruguay, during the time, there were two important commercial banks, the Banco Comercial and the London and River Plate Bank. And our conjecture is that they systematically, or initially at least, they would not follow the rules of the game, and they would try to affect the volume of credit in the opposite direction predicted by the model. And they would do that because their clients were rich merchants, Uruguayan merchants, that were involved in international trade. So basically, the background information is this. Behind the Uruguay project, there is Britain, the British Empire. Montevideo is a very important hub at that time. It's more important than Buenos Aires, for example. And also it has a very good geographical position. So there is a group of very rich people in Montevideo involved in international trade. So they basically, what they do is they import manufacturing and capital goods from Britain, and they would reship them to the wider region, such as South Brazil, Paraguay, and Argentina. And those guys, because they were involved in international trade, they wanted fixed exchange rate. They wanted stability of their domestic currency. And those guys were the clients of those two important commercial banks in Montevideo. So these two banks, we know from anecdotal evidence that they would be, supporters of the system throughout this entire period of almost 40 years. So there is, you understand that there is a political dimension of in our paper, especially during this period up until the mid 1890s. This is a deflationary period. Okay, so it was very hard to maintain the gold standard, also because this is a deflationary period, and still Uruguay managed to do so without a central bank. Okay. Right. Okay. So here, as the first part of the paper shows the number. Here we plot the number of banks in Uruguay over the period from late 50s till 1913. Okay. And basically, for us, the number of banks is a degree of competition in the banking sector. So the starting point is 1876. Basically, this is when the year when the gold standard was reinstated, and they never went back. They went off since then. Okay, so this is when our data starts. And note that in the beginning of this period, up until mid-80s, the number of banks operating in Uruguay are 2 or 3. 2 of those banks are the ones I mentioned before, the important banks. So for us, this period is important because this is an oligopoly period for us. Okay. Then in the second half of the 80s, there is an economic boom in Uruguay, and this increased the demand for credit, and therefore we saw the creation of new banks. But after some point, we also saw a crisis in the country suffering from important crisis. So 2 of those newly established banks went bankrupt, and therefore the number of banks operating in Uruguay dropped to 10. So this is a second period that is interesting for us. We call it the boom and the crisis period after the oligopoly period. And then, say, from the second half of the 90s until 1907, there is a third period where we saw the creation of further banks. This is a very competitive period with multiple currency issues. So note here that you have different banks, all of them issuing currency. There is no central bank. It's a free banking system in Uruguay. So this is a third period with increased competition, and the final period from 1907 until the end of the sample. This is a competitive period with a sole currency issue, because one of those newly established banks, the Banco de la República, was given monopoly of issuing currency. So this is the only period where you have some kind of monopoly in the banking sector, of course, with the exception of the first period. Okay. So for us, so we look at the time period, and then we run our analysis for all those 4 sub periods. Okay, so how much time do I have? So I have about 20 minutes. Okay. So if you look at the periodic literature again, you would see that one of the methodologies that the initial papers, similar paper by Bloomfield used, was to look at the balance sheets of the central banks of 10 countries. I think all of them 11 countries, core countries, and to see if domestic assets, credit, i.e. credit, and international assets, gold, move in the same direction. So they show that in 60% of the years from 1880 till 1893, they move in the opposite direction, indicating that basically they broke the rules in 60% of the cases. Okay? And more recently, I'm using volumetric methods and specifically vector autoregressions. Bazot et al. Would confirm the result for 20 countries using a wider period, a gold standard period, and using a more robust analysis. Okay. Then for the US in particular, Bazot et al. This is another interesting case, the US, because the US operated also under a free banking system, highly regulated though. Okay. So for the US, the Bazot, the authors show that basically they had less room to maneuver because there was no central bank, and also their banking system was highly regulated. So this is the main takeaway from this last paper by Bazot and co-authors. Now, our paper, we try to basically use these 2 approaches. Okay, the balance sheet approach, first used by Bloomfield, and then the VAR approach to confirm results for Uruguay. We look at balance sheets of the commercial banks' balance sheets, okay, over this period of time from 1885 till 1913, and we look at the we calculate the percentage of years for which gold, okay, and credit would move in the opposite direction. Opposite direction means that you break the rules. You don't follow the rules of the game. Okay, so we calculated this for Banco Comercial and the London River Plate Bank, and the percentage is 60%. So this figure is close to 61%, 60% that Bloomfield found for the core countries. Okay, so 61% of the cases of the years, these two banks basically would move credit to the opposite direction to what the model predicted. Whereas for the other commercial banks, newly established banks, for example, Banco Italiano, or the Bank of Spain on the River Plate, or Banco de la República, Banco Popular, the percentage of years where these two assets move in different direction is significantly lower, 22%, 41%, 31%. There are two exceptions here. This bank, English Bank of the River Plate and the Banco Nacional, but they operated only for 4 years. Actually, they went bankrupt during the 1991 crisis. Okay, so the figures here are higher, 50%, but you know we should be. The sample here is of course special, only for here. Yes.
Yeah, and in the fault of these two banks, you think there are correlation with
the established bank?
Yeah.
Yes.
With the decision to break rules.
Yes. Because basically those two banks and those two large banks would would sell their the assets of the especially Banco Nacional, because Banco Nacional was created with the initiative of the state. The people that support that would basically not favored, right? Not the merchants, the big merchants. Those people, there was a push for the creation of a new bank. It was not really state-owned, but state-controlled. But it went bankrupt, and it went bankrupt partly. One reason is because the other two banks, basically during the crisis, they started selling the Banco Nacional's currency. Basically, currency means banknotes. Okay, so they devaluated them basically, essentially. Yes, so this is a good question. It's related to the big players. Two big players. So one evidence in our the first evidence we presented in the paper is this. We base our analysis on balance sheets, okay, and we confirm Bloomfield's results, broadly speaking, and then we collected a new data set, hand collected actually, and it's a new data set for peripheral countries. The frequency is good, it's high frequency data, monthly data, important for this type of analysis when you want to see the reaction within a year. So you need monthly data. The sample period is from November 1876 till December 1913. And what we collect basically is the Uruguayan market rate based on the bills of exchange discounted at the Montevideo Stock Exchange, La Bolsa de Comercio. And we also collected data on the exchange rate based on the bills of exchange, 3-month bills of exchange, but we converted it to spot rate. Okay, so we obtained 2 series of data. Interest rates, short-term interest rates, the market rate, and then the exchange rate for Uruguay. Our primary sources are basically the bulletin of the Bolsa de Comercio in Montevideo, but also financial press, Uruguayan financial press, such as El Siglo, La Gracia, and so on and so forth. Okay, so those are our primary sources, and these are hand-collected data that my author actually, I have to say that, spent a lot of time collecting this data. Okay. This is a sample of our from the primary sources, the Boletín de la Bolsa de Comercio, and this is our data. So basically what we do is, so we collected data on the Uruguayan discount rate or market rate, actually better market rate. There's no central bank here to discount, so it's a discount rate, but market rate, market discount rate. And here we plot the Uruguayan rate with the BOE rate. The BOE rate is the Bank of England rate. So Britain is the dominant, the most important economy by far during this period of time. So this is the benchmark interest rate that we look at, and we want to see the reaction of the Uruguayan rate to the BOE rate. So what we do here is we have three variables. We run three variable VARs with BOE rate, Uruguayan rate, and exchange rate. BOE rate is first in the identification scheme. So the identification scheme is based on Cholesky standard, standard scheme where basically the BOE rate comes first. So it's the least endogenous variable, affects the Uruguayan variables contemporaneously within a month, but is not affected by the Uruguayan variables within a month, only after a month. So this is very standard in the literature. And we calculate the pass-through rates. As a pass-through rate, we obtain the impulse response, so we shock the BOE rate, and we see the reaction of the Uruguayan discount rate. Okay, and basically we find the maximum reaction, and we divide the maximum reaction to the shock we give to the BOE array. Okay, so we'll say 100% pass through means that 1% increase in BOE rate implies 1% increase in the Uruguayan rate. So the relationship is 1 to 1. That's the idea. Okay, so we run the model for the entire period, and we find a pass-through rate of 30%. Okay, 30%. And then we rerun the model for the sub-periods, the oligopoly period. The pass-through rate is lower, is significantly lower, it's almost 20%. And here we also report the number of banks in operation as an indicator of the degree of competition in the banking sector. As you see, as we move from oligopoly to the other periods, more competitive periods where the number of banks increases, the pass-through rate increases from 20% to 34% to 40, almost 7% during the competitive multiple currency issuer period, and then drops to 41% during the last period. So the main takeaway from the first table is that the pass-through rate is positively related to the degree of competition in the banking sector. Okay, and then we compare our estimates to the ones found in Bazot and co-authors, and we see that they are not so different. For example, Bazot et al. For the USA found a pass-through rate of 49%. So this is a similar case, a country with a free banking system, but highly regulated system. For our competitive period, the most competitive perhaps period, just before the Banco de la República is given monopoly of issuing the currency, is 47% almost versus 49%. So our figures, our estimates are not far from what Bazot found for the US. Of course, Bazot for the rest of the countries, for example, for core economies, they found a pass rate of 24%, whereas for periphery 17%. This result seems weird, because if anything, for periphery, the pass-through rate should be higher because they have no established central banks or no central bank. But those countries also use capital controls. Okay, so Uruguay use no capital controls. Core countries use no capital controls, whereas peripheral countries, including Scandinavia, if I'm not mistaken, would use capital controls occasionally at least. So that's why this figure here for peripheral countries, is quite low. It's a lot lower than basically our figures here. Okay, so yeah. So going back to this story, background story about these two banks. So during the oligopoly period, we know that it's a lot lower. Again, it's a lot lower because only 2 or 3 banks, up to 4, operated during this period. And this is our conjecture that basically those guys did break the rules of the game. It's just a conjecture. Okay, we find some evidence, but indirect evidence. Okay, so we don't really have anecdotal evidence to support our findings in this sense. Yes.
Just a clarification: the higher is the pass-through rate, the more close is the rule of the game application.
Yes, you play by the rules, because when the Bank of England is 1%, so you follow that. You don't try. Say
so the
increases,
transmission is close to the perfect one-to-one.
Okay. Because the idea here is that when Bank of England increases the rate, this is a negative shock for you, because you have to increase the rate and depress the economy.
Okay.
Okay, that's the idea. Still, we need some work to do, and you know, reframe a little bit our results, and you know, support. Find more evidence perhaps to sustain our hypothesis. So one piece of this evidence is the following one. Some people ask us, well, maybe Uruguay is too far from the center of the world, which is Europe at that time, basically, and maybe it's not well integrated into world markets. So to answer this question, we collected wheat price data. So wheat is an important commodity. It feeds most of the population. It's an important part of consumption during that time. So we collected wheat prices for different cities at the monthly frequency: London, Paris, Berlin, Budapest, Oslo, and Montevideo. And we calculated the correlation coefficients for 2 periods, for the entire set period from 79 till 1913. Okay, and here we see that Montevideo is not really, out of the world markets. It has a correlation coefficient of 68%. Compare this to Oslo, 59%, or to Budapest, or even to Berlin, with London, I mean. And then we also look at the correlations for this specific first period, our oligopoly period. Okay? Of course, the data don't match exactly with our estimates, because our estimates start in 77, whereas our wheat data, are available a couple of years later. But anyway, this is our first period, and still the correlation between Montevideo and London is very high, 80%. Okay, so it's not that Uruguay was basically disintegrated from the rest of the world. Okay, and yeah, I think that was it. We believe we study an interesting case. Uruguay, during the gold standard period, is the only peripheral country that managed, without central bank, to stay for such a long period, without almost any interruption, okay, with any crisis. There was some little crisis in 1991, but this was like not even 6 months. There is background information there where those two banks basically insisted and pushed for to go back to the to gold. There was some period, short period of 6 months, where the government was thinking to suspend a convertibility to gold, but these two banks would pressure the government, and then the government would accept to go back to gold standard. So almost no interruption. The pass-through rates that we calculate during the competitive period are quite close to the US ones. Remember also the US is had a highly regulated banking system. Okay, the Eurozone one that was not so highly regulated, and indeed these it seems that this is just a conjecture that these two commercial banks would play the role, or would play the function, would have the function of a central bank. There were two banks, basically main banks, especially during the first period. Okay, well, thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much. Do you have any questions, comments?
Then breaking the rules, I mean, it's positive for the banks and for how is the mechanism?
Well, breaking the rules means that when there is a trade deficit and there is a gold outflow and therefore a drop in prices and in credit, basically you don't depress credit as much. Okay, so you are maybe you are from the commercial from this commercial bank's perspective, maybe they wanna keep credit open to their main clients, and that's why basically they break the rules of the game. They don't increase the interest rate as much. That's what our estimates show, that there is no...
You have incentives to do so, you would say. I mean, if the bank is
yes.
enrolled with the economy...
Yes, those two banks, that's our hypothesis, that basically they were involved in international trade, and were involved in this business. It was their clients, but the main clients, but the main clients are basically those banks. Yeah. So they did have an incentive, and this is a case different, and it's interesting case also when you compare it to Argentina. Argentina is similar, but different in an important way. In Argentina, the rural guys are important because there is a lot of agricultural production. Okay, those guys that export. Involved in the, in international trade, export primary goods, are really, really important. So basically, they would benefit from a depreciated currency. That's why in Argentina went off and on during this period of time. They couldn't stay continuously on gold, because when there was a crisis, those lobbies were very strong in Montevideo. The lobbies were the main merchants that would actually import and then export the goods from Britain. So the trade was different that they were involved compared to their Argentine merchants. Yeah.
The crisis.
Yes.
In that period that you in the study, there is crisis. Yeah.
Yeah.
Which years and the effect of the crisis the same like Latin America, Europe. I mean, financial.
Yes.
Exactly. Because the banks.
Yes, I'm not sure if this crisis, I have to go back, I'm not sure if this crisis comes from Europe or Britain. I'm not 100% sure if it does come from Britain. Some of these crises came from Britain. but I'm not sure if this crisis came from Britain. It was severe in the case of Montevideo for sure, and it affected two of the newly created banks. That's what I can tell. But yeah, I should go back and study more about the international aspect. I know that the '66 crisis was transmitted to many countries, including Uruguay.
Because the crisis before is different, like what we know. I mean, Asian crisis, COVID, and 2008, in 1931. Before, it's no technology, but this crisis.
Well, sure, but they are more connected.
Yeah,
They are more connected because
this is my question.
actually,
how affected? I mean,
yeah, they are connected definitely. So the second bank, the London River Plate Bank, is basically a London-based bank. Definitely, yeah, they are connected because there was. So basically, what what Britain does is invest the excess savings in these countries. Okay, and then there is the railways. So all this is basically a project financed by, in most cases, by Britain, in Argentina and in Montevideo, but in other countries as well. Yeah, the prices are definitely a spillover. Yeah, there's a high spillover here effect. Yeah, definitely. Other questions?
In the figure with the temporal evolution, you base your categorization on the number of banks. You say a low number of banks, this is oligopoly, a high. This is, I know nothing about the history of the banking system, but in general, this is not, is only part of the story. The number of agents you have.
I agree.
There are more.
I agree that this is not a perfect measure of banking sector competition. I do agree, and maybe we should, we should rephrase our definition of competition here. What we mean, but definitely I agree with that. We are aware of this issue, but this is the only data we have available, and this is easily available, right? Because the number of banks operating in Uruguay, this is data at that time easily available. But yeah, you're right. Yeah. Other questions?
Okay, once again, thank you very much. Thank you very much, Nektarios.
Thank you.
Nice
Thank you.